Welcome to another segment of Native Connections. Today we're with John Christian Hopkins, journalist and author. Welcome, John.
Welcome. Thanks for having me on. I'm able to greet you in my native language the best I can. So, Oscar Wikwasan ni Tampog, which means good day, friends. Natusuwisi Pakulawa Nipos, I am called Standing Bear. And that's my tribal name, and there, of course, my John Christian Hopkins is the name I go by, and my author name, which everybody says sounds like an author, so I kind of like that.
Yeah, it does. That's cool. And what linguistic group, if you know, would your tribe be from?
It's Algonquin.
Okay.
My tribe is Narragansett, out of Rhode Island. We were once the largest tribe in New England, but due to wars and massacres, our numbers got whittled down pretty good. We're still around with about 2,500 people on the roads. We used to have what the English knew as kings and queens, and I'm descended on both sides of my family. On my father's side, I go back to Queen Esther, and on my mother's side, I go back to King Ninigret, who was here during King Philip's War in the 1670s. So I got royal blood on both sides, and that's pretty cool. To belong to the Narragansett tribe now, you have to be able to tie at least one ancestor to the 1880 detribalization rules. That's when the state of Rhode Island decided that we were no longer Indians and just colored. And we had all the rights of colored people, which, back in the 1800s wasn't very many rights.
Right.
So they detribalized us, and they created a list of 324 names that they said were Narragansetts. So you have to have one descendant on that list to qualify for the tribe. I only did genealogy on my mother's side, and I tied to like half the people. Just that. I didn't even bother doing my father's side.
Wow.
So I tied to quite a few of the people. So I have, one of the stronger bloodlines left in the tribe. And also because the New England tribes, New England's kind of a small area. The tribes tend to intermarry. So I actually have Pequot blood, Mohegan, and Wampanoag. And one of my Wampanoag ancestors was Quadriquina, who was the brother of Massasoit, if you remember the Pilgrim and First Thanksgiving story. And Quadriquina was the one who brought popcorn to the first Thanksgiving. So that's like my claim to fame, except that I wish he had patented the idea. Then I could have some of all those Red Stockers money, but... So... I'm from the poor Indian side of popcorn.
Yeah, the poor side. Well, that's really neat. And that's the thing that some of our listeners possibly have never heard of either of your tribes. I have, as I told you, my wife is from Rhode Island originally, and I've done a lot of reading and Native history, so I was somewhat familiar. I became a little more familiar reading your recent book. I may mispronounce it, but Carlo Magno?
That's how I pronounce it.
Okay.
You got it right.
All
You're
right.
the first one to get it right.
Oh, well, thank you.
People called it kumquat and calamari. Everybody, they get it wrong. Yeah. You got it right. The book kind of like brings some of the Eastern tribes to life, which is what I wanted to do because, you watch movies or something and you always hear, Apaches or Sioux or something. You don't hear anything about Eastern tribes, and the only time you do is last of the Mohegans, which isn't even true because there's still Mohegans around.
Right.
So you don't hear much about the Eastern tribes, and now that I moved out here, I live on a Navajo reservation with my wife, Sarah Risa, who's a Navajo tribal member, and whenever someone asks my tribe, they've never heard of it. And actually, half of them never heard of Rhode Island either. They think I mean Long Island. So, there's a lot of misperceptions, and a lot of people out in the western states a lot of native people tend to have the opinion that there are no real natives left in the east.
Right.
And when people say that to me, I tell them, our tribe met the English people 100 years before your tribe did. Give yourself another 100 and see how much of your culture and stuff you still have left.
Yeah.
I mean, because they made an effort of stamping out the culture and like Christianizing you and I mean both of my wife's parents went to Indian boarding school and the stories they tell. I mean, her dad was like 5 years old and they came and took him away. Her mom was like 9 and they sent him to Oklahoma. I mean, it's not like they took him a couple 20 minutes away or something. They basically, it's like being growing up in prison or something.
Right.
So
well, and knowing
a lot of people don't know that history.
Right, and knowing the history of those boarding schools, they were patterned after military operations. Patterned many of them after the one up in Pennsylvania, Carlisle, and the fellow that ran that was the guy that imprisoned Geronimo down in Florida. And he did such a good job of that, they said, we're going to give you the ability to take care of small kids. You're a good prisoner.
I didn't know that. I just
yes. Yeah, and I can think of his name if I take a minute, but yeah, that's what they did. And so most of these boarding schools, the children would sleep in dormitories, basically like barracks but dorms. They would wake up in the morning. They would get in uniforms. They would march to breakfast and so on. And so any vestige of growing up in a family with your grandparents telling you who you are and what your stories are and initiation rites. I was in a training one time, and a Pueblo woman said one of the women in our tribe, they didn't allow her to go home during the initiation rite as a woman, and so she's still considered a child in our tribe, and she's 70 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, and there were we could do several shows just on those, and there's a whole lot of history, about how natives were treated all across the board. But going back to what you said, where the Western tribes don't know the Eastern tribes, a friend of mine introduced me to a Santo Domingo drum maker, and he said, "What's your tribe?" And I said, "Catawba," and he said, "Oh, is that a new one?" And I said, "Yeah, they just did it yesterday." And he realized what he said, and he kind of swallowed his face, and he said, "No, I said, I get it. You guys haven't heard of us. I know that." And my other tribe is Pamunkey from Virginia, who also met the folks at the boat. The Pamunkey, the Powhatan, were the Virginia colonies. And so anyway, yeah, really interesting history, and it's such a shame that we tend to do that as natives. Where we, the only real Indians are Western Indians, or you all are too assimilated, or whatever it is. But then when you look at it, there's probably less than 100 of the federally recognized tribes that have native speakers of their languages. Fluent native speakers, but. Going back to Carlo Magno, one of the things that struck me in the two books of yours that I read, Two Guns and Carlo Magno, was that you tipped your hat to Louis L'Amour. In Two Guns, you talked about his friend, I think it was Tyrell Sackett, the gunslinger in Mora, and then in Carlo Magno, one of the smaller characters towards the end of the book was Louis Dearborn, and I went, wait a minute, I know that name, so I Googled it, Louis Dearborn L'Amour. And you want to speak to that a little bit? I thought that was really clever, and I thought it was neat that you did that.
Well, I love Louis L'Amour books, and one of the things I was just going to mention to you, you're talking about the Catawba and Pamunkey.
Mm-hmm.
I just finished rereading one of his books, To the Fair Blows the Wind, I think it was. No, To the Far Blue Mountains.
Far Blue Mountains.
He talks about what.
And
he talks about the Catawba and the Pamunkey.
Well, and in Sackett's Land, he also talks about the Catawba. But you're right, both of those books. Yeah. I was telling my wife that this morning. I have a nephew who's in the Marine Corps in Japan, and we see his Facebook pages, and one of them, he said recently, if I were reborn as a man, I'd want to be Tel Sackett. And I wanted to write him and tell him, well, why don't you be George Head? There's three of them, my dad, my grandpa, and his dad, my brother. You can't go wrong either way. Pick those three guys, you'll be fine. But I know what he's talking about with Tel Sackett, because Louis L'Amour did such a good job, especially in those series of Sackett books of Fallon Sackett and Orrin Sackett and so on, of developing those characters to where you felt like you knew them.
Yeah, he really does that. And like I grew up meeting him like my father and I didn't get along very well, but one of the things we had in common was we loved Louis L'Amour books, and and I read others, Ernest Haycox and Max Brian, all the Zane Grey and them, but Louis L'Amour to me just stood out. And like I wanted to be a writer my whole life, and when I was about 23, I actually wrote to Louis L'Amour for some advice, and I was really shocked when he actually wrote me back a typewritten 3-page letter, which I since lost.
Yeah.
He actually wrote me back and answered my questions and stuff, and I was just so impressed that this guy, he writes 3 books a year, though he's busy. And I'm like, this guy took the time to answer an unknown and, offer his advice and stuff. And that was just kind of special to me. So that's one thing that I try to do if a new writer or, ask for my advice or how to do something. I always try to make time to, offer some advice or help them out, just because I just think that it's the right thing to do. Like this famous guy took a few minutes out of his time to try to help me. So I guess if they call it pay it forward, like if I can help somebody else, I'm willing to do that. And but just I don't know, Louis L'Amour is, to me, I know they'll never compare him to like Shakespeare or something, but to me he's up there. I mean, his stories, they just grab you. They're like spellbinding. The characters, like you said, that the people come to life. Like you really think you know them, and it's just like I wish I had half of his talent, because that'd be sad if I could do that. But yeah, and I like doing that in my books. I mean, doing little tips of the cap to like different people and stuff, and in Two Guns, one of the characters, he doesn't play a big role, but it's the cook Benito Manuelito is a nod to my brother-in-law, because he's 6'8" and he wants to be a cook.
Oh, okay.
So, I kind of created that character. So I'll do that. So I'll like make a character, and usually it's just some minor character or something, but you read it and you'll see, like, oh, that's cool. Or I'll do some. I'm a big baseball fan, so sometimes I'll slip in somebody's name from early 1890s baseball or something. And it's like, hey, if readers, catch on and get it, that's great. If I got a little inside secret, but like you got Louis Dearborn, and I was like, hopefully somebody will pick up on that. But I didn't, if they don't, then hopefully they still just enjoy the book. But I'm so glad you caught that.
Oh, the second time I read his name, I thought, I know that name. I know where that comes from. And I'd already been clued in with Two Gun, because I read it first. And I thought, okay, this is a reference to Louis L'Amour. So I Googled, and of course, because I'd read that years ago, Louis Dearborn L'Amour, and it stuck in my head. Well, one time we were fishing, my dad, his younger brother, who I'm named for his middle name, Uncle Keith. I'm Wayne Keith, and he was Lyle Keith Head, and he went by Keith. But it was my dad and Keith and his son Terry and I. We were fishing up on out past Durango, further out there, over on Wolf Creek Pass, towards Alamosa, Colorado. But we're fishing, and Uncle Keith says, and Tel Sackett was right here, and he points to a piece of land near the river, and he fought this guy, and he knocked that guy over there, and he had it all plotted out right where we were fishing, and it was just the funniest thing. And half of me was going, he could be right, he's probably correct. That's where it happened, but he knew the whole scene, and it's that kind of thing that you're talking about. My uncle was a mechanic most of his life, and a good man, but he would read we all tended to read the westerns, but also because we're from the West for one thing now. My family grew up around Farmington, New Mexico, and southern Colorado, and since 1887 when they left the Catawba Reservation. But anyway, he just had it laid out, and he was just, and Tel was here, and the guy was there, and he pushed that one and shot that one, and it was just something to watch him tell the whole scene on the river there, But you're right.
It's pretty neat, because when he names a place in his book, they really exist.
That's
he's
it.
Really meticulous at that.
Yeah, if he tells you,
I've heard that they even do tours.
Yeah.
Like they do like Louis L'Amour tours of like places in his books and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably pretty awesome to go to.
Yeah, that would have been something. And that's the thing. If he told you a historical event, as far as history knows, that's how it happened. As far as history was or is, that's where it happened. And that's one of the things I really enjoyed about Louis L'Amour. not many, but some of the other Western authors, you weren't sure because they kind of twist and they'd say, well, I changed this and I kind of wandered over here. But if Louis L'Amour told you there was a gunfight on this corner of this street in 18 whatever, it happened, or it's recorded as having happened.
Put money on it.
Yeah. And that was kind of his power of writing also. And he would tell you little things, like I still shake out my shoes to shake out scorpions, spiders, whatever.
Yeah, I do that. I always think of him when I do it.
And I do too. Yeah, same thing. And I did it this morning, and I'm thinking, like Louis said, and I'm shaking my shoes. So, it's neat to be able to touch a range of people for generations that way. And that's what I love about writing and reading writing. I got a question for you to switch just a little bit. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I was going to say, one of the things about Louis L'Amour, too, like you said, when he talks about things, sometimes I wonder, did that really happen? And so I'll actually do research and learn more than his book tells you. And I try to do that with my work, because I got that from him. In Carlo Magno, there's a big earthquake. Well, I don't want to give it away, but there's a big earthquake, and one of the major cities is damaged heavily. That earthquake really happened, the day I said it did.
Mm-hmm.
So, I kind of try to mix in reality with fiction, just like Louis L'Amour does, and that's my hope, that somebody reading my book, like you said, when you saw the name Louis Dearborn, and you're like, I know that name. You did more research, and that's what I hope happens. Someone reads this, and maybe they read about this earthquake scene, and they're like, wait, is that real? And they'll look it up and find out, read more about it. And that's what I like, that I can kind of, I want to entertain, but also educate.
Yeah, and I like that about your books. I know I emailed you and said, I'm reading Carlo Magno, and the one thing I don't like is its ending, because I'm right at the last chapter.
I know, I like that. That's awesome.
It really was that.
I'm going to have to do a sequel.
Have you? Oh, cool.
Yeah, I just haven't got around to it. I mean, I have so many ideas in my head that I always say, like, if I live to be 100, I still won't be able to finish all the stories I'm planning on.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you touched on.
I like the character.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I did too. I thought it was great. You took this little boy who had become a refugee, became a slave, and again, not to turn it in, to tell the story away from people reading it, but he becomes a buccaneer, a pirate, and it was just amazing the way you took it and you believe it. And one of the things I wanted to go back to real quickly, you touch on that a lot of people don't know about, is Indian slavery. Could you talk about that a little bit, or at least as it occurred in your book?
Yeah, people, really don't think of that. But, before they started importing Africans, they tried to enslave Indians. They tried it in New England, but the problem was that the Indians would escape and they knew the word, they knew how to get back home. So that's why they started to sell Indian slaves into the West Indies, where they couldn't get back home. But that was kind of a lucrative, business for early New England. In the New England War, like the Pequot War in 1633 and King Philip's War in 1675 and 76, they would capture Indians and sell them into slaves in the West Indies. They said it was to help pay for the war costs, but they also would make a lot of money doing that. And so my story, the beginning of my story is, absolutely true. King Philip's wife and son were captured and sold as slaves, but they never named his son. The story is that they captured his son, they wanted to kill him so he couldn't grow up to lead a rebellion. The church leaders stepped in and said, this kid, he's like 8 years old, you can't just kill him for he didn't do anything. So they decided the Christian thing to do was sell him as a slave. So that's what happened to him, and then he disappears from history. So what I decided to do was give him a life. I mean, to start from okay, he's been sold into slavery. This is the son of, King Philip, and his father is the Grand Sachem Massasoit. So it's like, he wouldn't have been content or wouldn't have, meekly submitted to slavery. So I kind of said, what would he do? I said he would make every effort he could to get back to his homeland. And, and actually, the thing is, a lot of people don't realize this about pirates. On a pirate ship, that's actually one of the world's first democracies. It really was one man, one vote. And, in the Hollywood movies, the captain, he's got all the power and everything. in real life on a pirate ship, the crew could hold a vote anytime they want, and if the captain was voted out of office, he had to accept it or get thrown overboard. So it really was like one man, one vote. There were, black and Native American pirates. I mean, you don't see them. I love Errol Flynn movies and Douglas Fairbanks Sr., but they're not acting. They don't show all the different people. And a lot of people are kind of surprised that, oh well, how would this Native American know how to be a sailor and stuff? But in my tribe, we used to build canoes that would hold 40 people and go out hunting whales in the ocean. So I mean, we knew how to navigate and stuff. It's not a stretch at all.
Right. Yeah, that's what I say, and you show that in the book. But it's very, it makes a logical conclusion. It's not that far out of the realm of possibility, and obviously historical fact. I thought it was really neat, and when I first read about Native American slaves, and I was sharing that with some of my friends, they were like, "No, that didn't happen." And some books I read said, "Oh, it happened, but it was very little." And then the next book I read says, "Oh no, it went on until the 1840s or so, 1850s."
Yeah.
And in some places, and in some places, what they would do is brand the owner's initials on the cheeks, facial cheeks of the Indian, and so it made it hard for him to escape and just blend back into native society. And we've done some, it kind of makes you wonder sometimes when you read about the savages, who they were talking about, but.
Exactly.
But yeah, I thought that was really interesting how you took that and worked that, and even in Two Gun, your hero is part Native American from New England. And
I want to, in all my stories, what I hope to do is kind of have some character, whether he's the lead or a minor character, I want to have some character Native, and I want to usually have them from some tribe that people haven't heard of, or, and just to kind of pique their interest into finding out more or something, So
right.
Don't be surprised if my next book has a pamunky in it or something. I mean, you never know.
I years ago I called Robert J. Conley, and I was reading one of his books, and I can't remember which one it was. I think it was The White Path, but I don't remember. It was the early Cherokee Chronicles, and one of his characters was Catawba Killer. And I told him, as I was talking to him, I said, I'm reading this book, and I was glad to see that Catawba Killer got killed in the 6th page. And he said, "Oh, you're a Catawba, huh?" And I go, "Yeah." And he was laughing. But I said, I was really glad to see that you rubbed out old Catawba Killer there. So he had a sense of humor.
I find Native American history fascinating to me, and most people today, I don't think the average person really knows it. In almost every instance, the natives were friendly to the white people when they first showed up in their territory.
Right.
I mean, my tribe in New England, I mean, the Pilgrims wouldn't have lasted if it wasn't for Wampanoag help, but people kind of forget that part, and they also forget, I mean, how cruel they were when they throw them into slavery. Or in my tribe, the big event was the Great Swamp Massacre. I'm not sure, how familiar you are with King Philip's War, but it was the big war in New England that kind of switched the power from the native to the English side.
Mm-hmm.
And my tribe, we were never a warlike tribe. We wanted to kind of, stay peaceful, stay neutral. But King Philip was trying to get us to join his side, and the English wanted us to join theirs. And we turned both down. The English decided that they couldn't risk us joining King Philip, so they decided to attack us. And so in the middle of winter, it happened to be a very bad blizzard that year, and it was December 19, 1675. We had a major winter encampment in the swamp, which was hard to get to, and only Narragansetts knew the way in. But because of the very harsh winter, the swamp froze over, so the white people were able to get into the swamp. They attacked our fort. We fought them. They started to enter the fort. We fought them back outside, so they set the fort on fire, and then they circled it and shot people as they were trying to escape the fire. So they killed. Some estimates say like 1,000 men, women, and children.
Wow.
People don't know about these kind of things that happened, and we weren't even in the war. It happened because we wanted to stay out of the war.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's just terrible. And the other thing I always say, like, whenever a chief came along that the white people couldn't defeat in battle, it would trick them, like Osceola of the Seminoles.
Mm-hmm.
They could never beat him in battle, so they invited him to a peace conference under a flag of truce, and then captured him, when he came in unarmed. And they did that. Cochise, they did it with Cochise. I think Mingus, Colorado. It's just
Crazy Horse.
It's just like, yeah, crazy, exactly. And that's like, well, you want to talk about honor and stuff, but look at how your ancestors treated mine.
Yeah.
It wasn't very honorable when someone comes in to talk peace without a gun and you put him in chains. And Osceola, when they sent him to prison, he died of malaria. I think it was off the coast of South Carolina, but he never got to see his family again.
Right.
But Chief Joseph, they put him on a separate reservation from the rest of his tribe because they was afraid of his influence.
Yeah.
He never got to see his homeland again.
Geronimo lived his life out in Oklahoma.
Oklahoma, yeah. But
yeah.
before that, he's in Florida too. I mean,
he went to Florida, and then he ended his days in Oklahoma. And there's remnants of his tribe there. There's the Kiowa Apache and some other tribes still there. But you're right. I mean, that whole terrible history, and most people don't know. You hear them say, "Well, why don't Indians just join in the melting pot like everybody else?" And then you read natives, and they say, "What are these folks doing in our country? We just had bad immigration laws. There's a lot of interesting things, and I'm with you. I enjoy reading Native history and about different survivors. How natives have turned things around. I talk all the time. I call it Indian ingenuity, but the clever things. Yeah.
I like that.
Oh, good. The clever things that natives have done to turn things around and make. My grandpa one time was. Visiting out at Chinle, Arizona, and my grandfather spoke fluent Navajo. He was Catawba and raised, in Farmington, New Mexico, and was actually an interpreter for the sheriff's office because he spoke fluently Navajo. But he was at Chinle, and he watched a man, and he was irrigating his cornfield, and what he had was soup cans by every plant, by every corn stalk, and he had a bucket with a ladle, and he had a little pinhole in the can, and he would go and he would fill up the little soup can, and that's how he irrigated his crop.
Wow, that's pretty clever.
No waste of water, and he would just go around and just walk and ladle the water and get some more out of the river and do it again. Lots of stories like that, but just that way of resiliency, of turning these negative things around. And I'm a social worker, and I work with kids, and I'll tell them, when life gives you lemons, turn it into lemonade. When it gives you gators, turn it into Gatorade. And they look at me, and I say, just survive, be resilient, twist that a little bit. And to me, Native people, that's the definition of that. Well, we're coming to a close on our time. It's hard to believe, but we've been at this 30 minutes. Why don't we close off for now?
I enjoyed it.
Me too. I did as well, and I'd like to. I'll close out now, but I'd like to extend an invitation. Maybe we can do this again sometime in the future and explore some other thoughts. Okay, sounds good. Well, let me sign off real quick. This has been Wayne Head with John Christian Hopkins, and we've been looking at New England history and other eye-opening knowledge and events. We'll see you in the next segment.